Today I want to focus on the type of exercise where you have to put sentences which have been removed from an article back into the text. Now the example that I'm going to use here is from a B2 first practice paper, but this type of exercise is also part of the C1 advanced exam, and it also occurs on the Language Cert CELT test, so it's quite a common way of testing your understanding of English. It's also one where you should be able to get full marks, because if you think about it, there must be clues in the text and the missing sentences in order to complete the task correctly. Otherwise it would be impossible. So it's really just a case of having the right technique to spot those clues. Okay, so here's my article, which is about female boxing, and on the right I've got the missing sentences. There are 7 sentences but only 6 gaps. So there's one extra sentence that is not required. It's just there as an extra distraction to make the task slightly more difficult. Now the first thing I'm going to do is look at these sentences and see if there are any clues worth noting. Sentence A is fairly unremarkable but mentions all that hard work. Sentence B mentions that target. So that must relate to something in the previous sentence. Sentence C talks about this space age training kit, which again is a reference to something previously mentioned. Similarly, sentence D mentions that mistake, and sentence E talks about those events. Sentence F begins with that's why, which again refers to something previously mentioned. And finally sentence G begins with what this meant. So there are lots of clues in those missing sentences. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the article and read it quickly to get an idea of what it's about. Obviously this is more difficult as a non-native speaker because you're not going to understand every word, but you should still be able to spot different themes in various paragraphs. The first paragraph introduces the topic and who Lucy O'Connor is, but that's not too important as there is no gap to fill in the first paragraph. The second paragraph is about her training schedule, and the third is about her diet. Paragraph 4 mentions clothing, and paragraph 5 is about safety and the scoring system in amateur boxing. Paragraph 6 raises the question of whether it is appropriate for women to box, and the last paragraph talks about how people confuse amateur boxing with professional fights. Okay, now let's start putting these sentences back into the article. Sentence G mentions training, and it's a perfect fit for the first gap. If I read the sentences together, they make sense. As a result of her success, Lucy was accepted onto what the Navy calls its Elite Sportsman's Programme. What this meant, in effect, was that she was able to train full-time. So I'm going to put sentence G there and cross it out in the box. It's important that you do this so you're not constantly rereading the sentences you have already used. Now let's look at the sentence before the next gap. Since she's first started boxing, she's had to shed 28 kilos. Now shed is not a very common word in this context, but it means lose. And then it goes on to say, losing the last 6, which took her into the flyweight category, required great determination. And the sentence after the gap says, as she explains, I don't go out to party anymore. The perfect fit for the gap is sentence B. So it reads, losing the last 6, which took her into the flyweight category, required great determination. That's because in order to reach that target, she had to totally rethink her lifestyle. As she explains, I don't go out to party anymore. So I've crossed out sentence B. Moving on, sentence C, with its talk of space age training kit, goes in gap 39. So it reads, Lucy wore a new titanium-based sports clothing range designed to improve circulation and aid recovery. Having access to this space-age training kit was certainly an advantage. So we put C in there and cross sentence C out. Okay, so now I've done half of the task and I'm confident that the answers I've put in are all correct. I'm not 100% sure about which sentence goes in gap 40, so I'm going to leave that and go down to gap 41. Sentence E mentions those events, and the sentence before the gap says, Lucy is quick to point out that women have been competing in martial arts such as taekwondo and judo for years. So taekwondo and judo are the events referred to in sentence E, so that's the correct answer there, and we can put that in. And of course we can strike through sentence E in the box. So that just leaves gap 40 and 42. Now the last paragraph focuses on how people confuse amateur boxing with professional fights, and sentence D talks about fewer people making that mistake. So that's a good match for gap 42. Now that just leaves gap 40, and the two possibilities are sentence A and sentence F. Now if we look at the sentences before the gap, you can see that they are in speech marks, and the speech marks end after the gap. So that's a big clue. It means the missing sentence must be something Lucy says herself. To follow, we approach it more as a skill and point scoring exercise rather than as a fight. So it must be sentence F. That's why I've always regarded it as a thinking girl's sport, really. So that completes the exercise. 6 sentences in the 6 gaps and 1 sentence left over. But the important thing to remember is the way I did it. I didn't do them all in order, but jumped around the text, putting in the ones that I was sure about first. Imagine if you come to the first gap and you don't know which sentence fits. If you guess, you're choosing one sentence from a possible 7, so you've more chance of being wrong than right. But if you do it like I did, putting in the ones you are sure about first and crossing them out when they have been used, if you need to guess at the end, you will be choosing from fewer options, so your chance of guessing correctly will be much better. And remember to look for those clues, little things like pronouns which refer back to something in the text, or even speech marks, as in the last example here. Okay, I hope you found that useful. Look out for the next video and I'll speak to you soon.